Humankind, while capable of altruism, benevolence, compassion, and love for other people, is subject to failing miserably in those same areas. We as humans are flawed, imperfect, impatient, suspicious, we doubt, we commit bad deeds, and can frequently be capable of unthinkable crimes against each other. On the other hand, many religious believers have a perfect higher power or authority they aspire to emulate in their pursuit of becoming better people. For Christians, the God of the Bible is characterized in many beneficent and holy ways. One of his perfect qualities is that he is an unchanging God that cannot lie. Consequently, it is believed that his statements are true, as his very nature prohibits change, and since he is incapable of lying, then his promise of an unimaginably wonderful heaven must be true for the faithful, as is the real possibility of hell for the unfaithful. In part 4 of this series, we will discuss whether God can lie, or whether he can be involved with deception. While this topic may not be as openly discussed, or as controversial as slavery, genocide, or the treatment of women, it strikes at the heart of fundamentalist Christian beliefs that the Bible is without error, as is its divine author. As in other videos in this series, this topic addresses the unchanging consistency of God as it relates to applicable Scripture in both the Old and New Testaments. In other words, does the Scripture, when holistically approached, portray and demonstrate God's declared or ascribed attributes as the unchanging, trustworthy, supreme authority? One of the 10 Commandments delivered to the children of Israel by God is Exodus 20:16, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." Many other verses state clearly that God cannot lie, and God hates lying. Old Testament Scripture goes so far as to say that deceivers and liars cannot continue in God's presence. To reiterate, the entire premise of God's promise of heaven is based on the fact that he is constant and cannot lie. Therefore, his promises about everything, including the afterlife, must be true. Let's take a look at what the biblical God has to say about lying and deception. Passages in Exodus 20, Psalms 101, Proverbs 6, Proverbs 12, Titus chapter 1, and Hebrews chapter 6 all discuss God's position on lying. In those scriptures concerning lies and deception, he directly commands against it. He says deceit will not dwell in his house and that lies won't continue in his presence. He hates a lying tongue and a false witness. It is said that lying lips are an abomination to him. It is said that he cannot lie and that it is impossible for him to tell a lie. It is abundantly clear from these passages what God says about lying and deception. Now let's take a look at a few other verses in which God is involved with lies or deception. First, let's look in the Old Testament. Take a look at 1 Kings 22:21 through 23. In this passage, God sits around, presumably in heaven, vexed with this big dilemma, wondering who will deceive Ahab, king of Israel, and send him to his doom in an unwinnable war. A lying spirit in God's presence volunteers its insidious services with regard to deception. God discusses it with the spirit. Then God gives his divine stamp of approval for the spirit to lie to the fatal detriment of the Israelite warriors and King Ahab. It's important to note contextually that Ahab's prophets were already telling him what he wanted to hear. God took a direct, active role in the deception of Ahab regarding the forthcoming battle between the Israelites and the Syrians. Now let's look in the New Testament. Take a look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 11 through 12. In this passage, God is again being punitively deceptive. Just like in the scenario with King Ahab, you have someone who has already made up their mind, in this case regarding the acceptance of the truth. Still, God finds it necessary to actively step in and ostensibly delude someone into believing something that is not true. Whether involvement is described as direct or indirect, God is inescapably involved in these deceptive scenarios. Let's give these direct and indirect situations some practical perspective. Let's say you have an explosives expert who's remotely directing your actions in the defusing of a bomb that's tied to a loved one. In order to defuse the bomb, you must cut either a red or a black wire. The expert knows you're supposed to cut the black wire to defuse the bomb. Cutting the red one will detonate it, but you don't know this, and you're depending on the expert to accurately direct your actions. If the expert tells you to cut the red wire, you've been lied to and your loved one is killed. In a second scenario, you're again attempting to defuse a bomb. This time, however, the expert knowingly whispers fatally wrong directions into the ear of a subordinate, who then relays that information to you. Again, on advice from the expert by proxy, you cut the red wire and your loved one dies. In these situations, would you personally know or feel like you were lied to? Would you go out of your way to defend the bomb expert from anyone who called him a liar? Because of our imperfect nature, humans will occasionally make mistakes and fail in matters of trust and judgment. But we don't claim perfection or an unchanging nature. The Christian God does. Either God is deceptive or he isn't. Either he can lie or he can't. Either he allows lying spirits in his presence or he doesn't. A single lie, deception, or half-truth discredits claims of perfection, an unchanging nature, and God's inability to lie. Can you believe the Bible when it says God cannot lie, hates lies, and won't allow liars in his presence, but then justify his involvement in deception and using lying spirits to his own end? Does this reinforce his ascribed character trait of being unchanging and constant? If the God of the Bible is not constant or is capable of deception, how can you be sure his promises of the afterlife are true? How can you be sure that anything he says is true or worthy of adherence?